The story begins with a boy awakening in complete darkness. He opens his eyes, but he cannot see absolutely anything, becoming confused and without any idea of where he is. For a few moments, everything remains empty, until he notices a faint glow slowly appearing in front of him. Little by little, this light intensifies, and he realizes that it comes from inside what seems to be an eggshell. Part of this shell is cracked, creating a small opening that allows him to see the outside. Through it, he notices that he is in the middle of a forest. This only raises even more questions, especially when he realizes that he cannot move his own body in any way at all. Before he can organize his thoughts, a status screen suddenly appears in front of him. Upon reading the information, he becomes completely frozen in shock. Because the system clearly indicates that he is a dragon egg, the confusion only increases. Soon after, the status window expands, now fully visible, and a divine voice announces that this interface displays all of his current abilities, accompanied by numerical values to make understanding easier. Still disoriented, he tries to speak to the divine voice, demanding an explanation for what is happening. However, the voice calmly responds that it still cannot explain everything, because he is still at level 1. This answer only makes him more irritated. In an act of frustration, he tries to move and ends up lightly shaking his body, which causes him to fall from the tree where he was resting. He hits the ground and begins rolling uncontrollably down a slope until he finally falls into a river. When he stops there, he realizes that he can see his reflection in the water. When he looks closely, he is shocked to notice that his reflected image is, in fact, a dragon egg. Realizing how lost he is, the divine voice decides to help him a little more and finally offers him a proper explanation. It confirms that he truly is a dragon egg, classified in that world as a rank F monster. If his shell were to be completely broken, he would die instantly, which means that creating that small opening to see had already been extremely dangerous. The divine voice continues explaining that, despite dragon eggs being at the base of the food chain, they possess the potential to grow and become terrifying dragons over time. However, this is only possible if they manage to survive long enough, which is not easy, since dragon eggs are considered a highly prized delicacy by various monsters. As they obviously do not have legs, the only form of locomotion is rolling. Even after hearing all of this, he still cannot fully understand what is happening to him. Remaining still seems extremely risky, so he decides to start rolling as fast as he can, trying to move away from danger. Unfortunately, this causes him to fall again. Plunging from a small cliff, he realizes that he has been falling quite a lot lately, and because of this, the system announces that his endurance has increased from level 1 to level 2. Even so, the fall reduces his hit points, reminding him that he needs to be more careful. Upon realizing that he is injured and exhausted, he decides to sleep for a while to recover his strength. As expected, when he wakes up, his hit points are completely restored. This confirms that resting fully recovers his health bar, which brings him a small sense of relief in this strange and dangerous situation. After that, he continues rolling while reflecting to himself, imagining what exactly will happen when he finally leaves that form. He wonders if one day he will become a gigantic dragon, and if he will be forced to fight alone against relentless enemies just to survive. As he moves forward, lost in his thoughts, he suddenly stops when he notices a giant insect not very far away. Sensing danger, he quickly hides behind a tree and uses his appraisal ability. The result reveals that the creature is called an egg devourer. As soon as the insect notices him, it immediately advances in his direction, making it clear that it intends to kill him. He begins to roll as fast as he can, but soon realizes that he will not be able to escape forever. Maintaining that pace, sooner or later he would be caught. With this, he understands that he needs to find a way to turn the tables. The monster chases him to the edge of a cliff. At the moment when the creature leaps toward him, trying to swallow him whole, he dodges at the last second. Using all the strength he has, he collides with the monster and manages to push it off the cliff. The creature plunges down the slope and dies instantly. That becomes the first battle he has ever won in his entire life. The system immediately announces that he has gained 12 experience points and that he has now reached level 5. As a result, all of his statistics are completely maximized. In addition, he meets the requirements to evolve, receiving the option to choose between becoming a baby dragon or a small dragon. Not knowing exactly what the difference is, the system explains, the small dragon is described as a common race of dragons, considered small only in comparison to others of the same species. Even so, when fully developed, it is still larger than a bear and is known for its powerful fire breath. The baby dragon, on the other hand, is not well suited for combat due to its short claws and small fangs, but it possesses enormous potential, being able to evolve into several different species of dragons in the future. However, baby dragons are considered an extremely valuable delicacy, both for monsters and for adventurers, which means that they are constantly hunted wherever they appear. Faced with this, the choice of the small dragon seems obvious, since it is the safest option for survival. However, soon after making his decision, the divine voice envelops him in a warm manner and tells him not to limit himself, explaining that it has great expectations for him and that he should always strive for something greater. Upon hearing this, he feels confused and begins to wonder if he truly made the right choice. After all, he chose the safest option, not the riskiest one, as he recalls how the system works. This doubt continues to echo in his mind. The divine voice had mentioned that the baby dragon possessed enormous potential, capable of evolving in many different ways in the future. Thinking about this, he begins to suspect that the small dragon might have a more limited evolutionary path, or that, after a certain point, it might no longer be able to grow fully. This idea keeps pounding in his mind. Taking this into consideration, he finally makes his decision and chooses to evolve into a baby dragon. He does not want to live with regrets later on, even knowing that this choice may be dangerous. He prefers to take the risk rather than wonder in the future if it was fear that made him limit himself. He wants to believe that the decision was truly his, without deceiving himself or choosing the easiest path merely for the sake of safety. The system accepts his choice without hesitation and carries out the evolution immediately. His body begins to change, undergoing a visible transformation until it takes on the form of a small yellow dragon, exactly as he had chosen. Along with the evolution, he acquires a large number of new abilities, and all of his previous statistics increase significantly compared to what they were before. Even so, his hit points and mana do not recover automatically after the evolution. He remains exhausted, which makes it clear that he will need to rest before exerting himself again. Almost at the same instant he realizes this, his stomach growls loudly, making it evident that he also needs to eat as soon as possible. When he looks toward the place where he defeated the creature earlier, he realizes that the worm he killed now looks surprisingly appetizing. He understands that, if he wants to continue growing stronger, he will need protein. With this thought, his dragon instincts awaken completely. Without hesitation, he devours the worm. After that, he lies down and falls asleep. When he wakes up the next morning, he feels full of energy, renewed after a good night of rest. He then heads to the river to observe his reflection. At that moment, he finally accepts that he was reincarnated in that world. What intrigues him the most, however, is the fact that he has no memories of his previous life. He does not know who he was, how he lived, or even whether he was a boy or a girl. All of that simply disappeared. While reflecting on this, he notices movement behind him and turns around, spotting several dark worms approaching. This time, instead of fleeing, he charges straight into the attack. Using his new abilities, he defeats the first wave quickly. As he continues fighting, he unlocks even more skills, making the combat increasingly simple and efficient. After defeating them all, hunger returns. However, he has no desire to eat those dark worms, as he remembers the horrible taste from the last time. Then, he finds some mushrooms nearby and decides to try them. This decision soon proves to be a mistake, as he quickly discovers that they are poisonous. After suffering from the effects, he decides that he will never eat mushrooms again. With this lesson learned, he ventures deeper into the forest in search of better prey, since he does not want to survive by feeding only on worms. After exploring for a while, he finds a gray wolf. Even though it is larger than him, the dragon manages to use his weak breath and dragon punch to defeat it. After the victory, he lightly burns the wolf's hide. When he smells it, he realizes that it resembles barbecue. Driven by curiosity, he uses his dragon breath again to roast the meat more thoroughly. When he finally takes a bite, he discovers that the flavor is incredible. Later, he encounters another gray wolf and defeats it almost instantly. With that, he reaches level 20 out of 25, realizing that he still needs to gain 5 more levels in order to evolve again. As soon as the wolf falls, he repeats the previous process, showing that he is already starting to get used to the life of a dragon. Hunting, fighting, and eating in this way begins to feel natural. Even so, despite growing stronger, he feels the weight of loneliness. The only voice he speaks with is the divine voice, and this starts to leave him bored and isolated. He is surprised to realize that he wishes he had a friend by his side. That desire is fulfilled faster than he imagined. A short time later, he hears voices coming from afar. He cannot understand the language being spoken, but he feels relieved to recognize them as human voices. Quickly, he hides behind a tree and observes carefully. He sees a small group of adventurers approaching. At first, he thinks about revealing himself and trying to communicate, but he soon remembers that he is a dragon. Fear arises of being attacked as soon as he is seen. Even so, he thinks that, because he is small, he might appear harmless or even cute. He even considers that they might treat him like a pet. Filled with hope, he steps out from behind the tree and places himself in front of them, trying to appear as adorable and harmless as possible. Unfortunately, the plan fails completely. The adventurers do not see him as something innocent, but rather as prey and valuable meat. Without hesitation, the leader of the group attacks him, plunging the sword into his chest. Immediately afterward, the man uses magic that numbs his entire body, preventing him from moving normally. He desperately tries to escape, but his muscles do not respond due to the paralysis. Helpless, he watches the adventurers slowly approach, clearly preparing to kill him. At that moment, he realizes how naive he was to believe that a dragon could befriend humans. After all the effort to survive and evolve, it seems that everything is about to end in a cruel and meaningless way. Just as the leader raises his weapon to deliver the final blow, a female adventurer steps forward and stops him. She questions whether it is really necessary to kill such a small, cute, and innocent-looking dragon. Confused, the protagonist wonders why he is still alive. A few seconds later, he feels a sensation of warmth spreading throughout his body. When he lifts his gaze, he realizes that the adventurer is using healing magic. He quickly uses his appraisal ability and discovers that her name is Miriam. Even though she is almost out of mana, she decides to heal him completely. While Miriam speaks to him, the system announces that he has acquired the human language comprehension skill, allowing him to gradually understand the language as the skill's level increases. However, this brief moment of calm and kindness does not last long. Suddenly, screams echo in the distance, loud and desperate. Miriam immediately recognizes those voices as belonging to her companions. Without thinking twice, she tries to run toward the sound to help them. Before she can get away, he grabs her arm tightly, clearly showing how distressed he is. He tries to stop her, warning that whatever is happening ahead is far too dangerous for her to face alone. Even so, Miriam breaks free and runs, ignoring the warning and leaving him behind. Watching her leave, the protagonist realizes that he cannot simply stand still while the girl who saved his life is in danger. Gathering his courage, he forces his body to move and runs after her. When he finally reaches the location, his heart sinks at the sight before his eyes. Miriam is facing a terrible monster, a stone dragon, classified as a level C enemy. The situation is even worse when he realizes that the creature has 197 hit points, which means that an absurd amount of damage would be required to defeat it. Miriam is already injured. At the moment she screams, the stone dragon turns all of its attention toward him, staring at that gigantic creature that is now watching him directly. He feels fear take over his body. His muscles lock up. His mind falls into conflict, and he wonders if this is how everything will end. Unable to move, paralyzed by terror and doubt, he feels that he is standing at the edge of the end, and thus, the first episode comes to an end. Luckily, Dragu manages to dodge the attack at the very last instant. As he moves, he thinks that he made a huge mistake by believing that the four of them could defeat that creature. When he was a child, he would never have imagined something like this. As he looks at Miriam, he realizes that she has very few hit points left, and, to make matters worse, the small dragon begins to advance slowly in her direction. Desperate, Dragu tries to help her, but he is interrupted by a voice that echoes, ordering him to run away. It insists that he leave immediately, because facing that creature is impossible. Dragu understands perfectly, without any doubt, there is no real chance of victory. Even knowing that the voice is right, he cannot abandon the girl. He decides, then, to do everything within his power. He starts rolling quickly across the ground, dodging the monster's attacks with such precision that he looks like a true master of evasion. In a short time, he realizes that the older man in the group is already dead. The other companion is still breathing, but he is unconscious and bleeding. Dragu understands that he needs to draw the monster away somehow. Without wasting time, he advances, rolling and attacking to provoke the creature. The dragon, which is small in name only, becomes enraged and begins to chase him. At least, that was what Dragu expected. However, the monster activates one of its abilities, causing a massive earthquake that leaves him completely immobilized. Dragu complains, realizing that that miserable creature is far too strong. Filled with rage, he throws a punch with his fist wrapped in flames, but the dragon simply activates its regeneration, recovering all of its hit points with extreme ease. At that moment, Dragu understands that there is nothing more he can do there. In the end, he decides to grab Miriam and flee from the place. There is no way to save everyone, but at least he can save one life. He carries her with him, moving away from the danger zone. Already far from there, he watches with concern as Miriam's HP continues to drop and, unfortunately, he has no healing abilities. Even so, Miriam is human, and that means there is a solution. If he wants to save her, he needs to take her to a human village. Following a faint, characteristic scent, Dragu hurries on, but soon realizes that the path is surrounded by a pack of gray wolves. They encircle them quickly, leaving no room to escape. With no alternative, Dragu fights the wolves to drive them away. During the struggle, Miriam briefly opens her eyes and, in a confused state, sees the small Dragu struggling against the beasts. Soon after, she loses consciousness again. As the night continues to advance, Dragu keeps carrying Miriam, already at the limit of his strength. By luck, he manages to reach the village. Without wasting time, he begins shouting for help, asking the villagers for assistance. However, they only hear roars and, feeling threatened, they attack, wounding his leg with a blade. Trying to make them understand, he realizes that it is useless. Then, he abandons Miriam's body, trusting that they will be able to help her, and quickly flees back into the forest. As he moves away, he understands that the more he tries to approach humans, the more they will see him only as a dragon, a monster. As if that were not enough, the voice of God appears once again, informing him that he has received a new title, rising from the insignificant level of Hero 1. 2 days pass, and Miriam finally awakens. Confused, she wonders where she is, until she notices a red-haired elf by her side. Realizing that she is in a village, the elf, named Muriel, explains that she used excessive white magic to heal her, and that now Miriam needs to rest. Miriam asks who brought her there and what happened to her companions. Muriel replies that the dwarf is dead, found as if he had been crushed by an enormous rock. As for the others, their bodies were not located, and everything indicates that they were devoured. Miriam collapses to the ground, crying, realizing that she is the only survivor. She blames herself, believing that she could have prevented everything. Muriel asks her to calm down, explaining that God has always done whatever he wanted. What matters is that she is alive now, thanks to someone who saved her. Muriel says that the dwarf was a good person, responsible for driving monsters away from the village and serving as an example for the children. However, one night, she heard comments at the tavern saying that he would never defeat a stone dragon. Offended, he decided to prove them wrong, practically killing himself out of pride. Because of that, he dragged GR and Miriam into forming a group, taking advantage of Muriel's absence and falsely claiming that he had her permission. Miriam knew that Muriel had warned them not to go near the dragon, but she ended up giving in to the pressure and her sense of guilt. She says that she agreed to accompany them only on the condition that they would retreat if the situation became dangerous. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned. Muriel states that the dwarf died because of his pride and congratulates Miriam for surviving such severe injuries. Excited, Miriam states that someone must certainly have carried her to the village. Muriel dismisses that idea, saying that they found signs of a monster attacking the village entrance, but that Gregory's group managed to repel the threat. Miriam insists that she passed out during the fight and that it is impossible for her to have escaped on her own. Muriel tries to convince her that strong blows can cause memory loss. Miriam accepts the possibility, but as she remembers Dragu fighting the wolves, she asks Muriel what those creatures were like. The monster that had been beside her was no longer there, although Miriam could not explain the reason. When they noticed its absence, they realized that it had simply disappeared. Maria asks whether Miriam is worried about something, but she prefers not to go into details. Even so, the subject continues to circle her thoughts, especially when she wonders whether that monster could be the same small dragon she had run into before. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Dragu gets up as if nothing had happened. He silently thanks the metabolism of dragons, along with a good period of rest. In his thoughts, he hopes that the girl is doing well. When he recalls the battle, he acknowledges that he was extremely weak in that confrontation. He believed that after evolving he would already be a bit stronger, but that fight revealed an absurd difference between him and a dragon, even one considered small. This awakens in Dragu a strong desire to become far more powerful. He feels that the time has come to act. With a change of scenery, he uses an egg eater to summon his allies, thus creating a perfect opportunity to gain experience. At that moment, the voice of God announces that he has received the title of the Path of Evil, something that leaves him slightly offended. Dragu quickly defeats the egg eaters, rises to level 25, and once again meets the requirements to evolve. Seeking the best place for the transformation, he goes to a lake and agrees to view the evolution options presented by the voice of God. 5 paths appear: Calamity, Marbleized, Angelic Child, Small Dragon, and Dragon Hatchling. The voice explains that the small dragon grows quickly and is safer at the beginning, but has limited potential, while the Dragon Hatchling offers a much more promising future. Dragu also analyzes the other options: the Child Dragon, his natural and safest evolution; the Marbleized one, focused on durability and mana; and the Angelic Dragon, with healing abilities but little offensive power. The juvenile Calamity represents the beginning of an evil path, although a reversible one. Even reluctant about the idea of becoming a Calamity, Dragu finds himself intrigued upon learning that this type of dragon is extremely intelligent and can assume a humanoid form, allowing it to infiltrate among humans. Still bothered by the meaning of this choice, he ends the chapter undecided, reflecting on which path to follow. He reflects on the idea of becoming a young plague dragon, and soon concludes that this might not be such a smart choice, since wherever he looks, that kind of power still frightens him. His greatest concern continues to be Miria's, and because of that, he wishes, no matter what happens, to obtain the ability of human transformation. After thinking for a long time, the protagonist comes to the conclusion that if he could learn this transformation, he might be able to experience a simple and righteous life. Even if everything went wrong, there would always be the possibility of turning back. With that in mind, he makes a sudden decision and chooses to evolve into a young plague dragon. His body transforms immediately, accompanied by the divine voice, which announces his evolution from a baby plague dragon to a higher stage. Despite it being exactly what he had chosen, the protagonist looks at his reflection in the water and feels his confidence waver. He no longer resembles the small, adorable dragon he used to be. The more he observes himself, the more his appearance seems dark and threatening. The divine voice then informs him that his status has increased from level 2 to level 3, now allowing him to review the details of his abilities. The level of the divine voice itself has also risen from 1 to 2, and he has acquired the abilities of flight and dragon scale dust. Upon hearing this, the protagonist feels satisfied for a moment. However, the divine voice continues, explaining that his bite has evolved into venomous fangs, that he has obtained a dark and sickening breath, as well as claws with paralyzing poison. All of these abilities sound extremely dangerous. He responds to the divine voice by saying that he did not need any of that. But it goes on to inform him that he also received the title of friendship, and that the curse increased from level 1 to level 2. With so much information, the protagonist begins to think that this decision might have been a huge mistake. To make matters worse, there is no mention at all of the long-awaited human transformation. This makes him think that he has ended up becoming something close to death itself, although he tries to convince himself that he might simply need to gain more levels to unlock that ability. The divine voice, however, states that it cannot provide explanations of that kind at level 3. Defeated, the protagonist feels miserable as he realizes that he gained so many strange abilities instead of the human transformation he desired. He then decides to review everything on his own and tries to learn more about the divine voice ability, questioning whose voice it truly is. The answer is direct. Explanations of that kind cannot be given at this level. Something he already suspected. Faced with that, he decides to analyze other abilities, such as dragon scale dust. The divine voice explains that when the dragon flaps its wings, it spreads a debilitating miasma that affects everything around it. At higher levels, this power would be capable of annihilating entire nations simply by flying over them. The protagonist carefully moves his wings, but that simple action kills a nearby flower, causing him to panic. He does not like the idea of being a walking biological weapon at all and complains that a warning would have been useful. The dust came out just from the movement of his wings, something that would never have happened if he were still human. The explanation continues with the sickening breath, described as an attack that spreads a disease-laden miasma. It not only causes severe illnesses, but is also extremely contagious, and, in the past, was responsible for the complete destruction of an entire civilization. Upon hearing this, the protagonist falls into complete despair, saying that nothing could possibly be more evil than that and wondering whether he will still be able to follow a righteous path. He then decides to analyze his titles, since they seem to strongly influence his evolution. The divine voice explains that hero is a title granted to those who represent modest and kind values, and who may one day become true heroes. This title slightly increases damage with certain weapons and has a strong impact on the evolutionary path. The protagonist does not reject this idea, as he believes it might prevent him from following an evil path. Next, the divine voice describes the title of malefactor, intended for cruel villains who leave piles of corpses behind. It slightly increases the damage of dark attacks, makes learning white magic more difficult, and reduces the overall recovery rate, while also strongly influencing evolution. Upon hearing this, the protagonist interrupts the explanation, stating that this is the worst ability he has ever heard of in his entire life. He begins to seriously believe that he made the wrong choice. Desperate, he asks the divine voice to take him back and says that he wants to return to being an innocent baby, deeply regretting his decision. Meanwhile, Mariel and Miriam check all the stones that protect the village. Mariel explains that these stones create a barrier that prevents monsters from entering. But in truth, the enchantment only subconsciously discourages them. Creatures with strong will or clear objectives can still pass through the protection. Miria supposes that this includes the monsters seen the other day, but Mariel states that there is no certainty, since no one saw it clearly. Even so, Miria believes that it might have been trying to help, especially after seeing it fight against the wolves. Mariel comments that if it had entered the village, it would mean the spell was broken, which would be a serious problem. But it would also indicate that it could return. Because of that, they decide to move on to the next enchantment and check whether everything is in order. After finishing, Miria asks if she can learn more about monsters, but Mariel notes that she has been strangely obsessed with them since the incident. Miria confesses that she cannot get out of her head the feeling of having been saved by a small dragon in the forest. Mariel immediately interrupts her, asking whether she might be developing feelings for a monster. Miria quickly denies it, although she hesitates for a brief moment. Despite her insecurity, Mariel decides to explain more about monsters. She says that they can evolve into different forms, growing stronger with each evolution, which happens by hunting other creatures. They level up, just like humans, who also possess their own levels. Miriam comments that humans can also evolve, improve their abilities, and level up by accumulating experience. Mariel confirms this and explains that, in the case of monsters, each species has a different maximum limit. When they reach that limit, they evolve into a higher form. This process repeats itself several times and, as time goes on, monsters take on increasingly powerful appearances. Miriam says it is hard to believe that people in the past managed to understand the true nature of monsters. Mariel then asks what she is talking about, since that explanation had already been given before and the event mentioned happened only 11 years ago. Miriam admits that she does not remember any of that, because at the time she was only 5 years old and still knew very little about the world. Mariel agrees that she is right, and Miriam comments that she was so small back then that she had to look up to see her. Mariel responds with an irritated look. Miriam quickly realizes that she touched on a sensitive topic, since Mariel is sensitive when it comes to her height. Even if that is probably true, Mariel denies it and completely changes the subject. She explains that, from time to time, special people appear who are capable of hearing the divine voice, which shares information about monsters, levels, and other similar matters. As happens with heroes or saints, it was thanks to these people that such knowledge spread, and not through simple trial and error. Monsters fight to survive, gain experience, and seek evolution. In other words, they are all driven to seek power and become more ferocious. Even if that dragon saved Miriam's life, the next time their paths cross, it will have evolved into something far more dangerous and will turn its fangs and claws against her. Miriam tries to say something, but stops halfway through. Mariel warns her not to create strange expectations regarding monsters. They are the embodiment of the instinct to fight, and that makes them incompatible with humans. Miriam has no choice but to accept those words, thinking that even that small dragon who saved her will one day change as it evolves. Meanwhile, the protagonist decides to level up as quickly as possible and return to the path he has chosen. After all, he intends to become a hero, not a demon king. To begin with, he wants to learn about human transformation and go to the city, because he wants to see her again, especially Miriam. Without wasting time, he starts searching for weaker monsters around him to gain experience quickly. Suddenly, moving becomes difficult. He notices threads wrapping around his body, preventing any movement. At that moment, he senses the presence of a huge monster behind him, but it is not the type of spider he had imagined. The protagonist quickly checks his attributes and discovers that it is an extremely powerful Taranturok. He understands that he has no chance of defeating it now. But before he can even try to flee, the spider fires its web. Immediately, he uses his baby dragon breath to burn the threads, but ends up setting his own body on fire in the process. While rolling on the ground trying to put out the flames, the divine voice announces that he has acquired fire resistance. As soon as he manages to stand up, he quickly advances to check how much damage he dealt to the spider. The Taranturok still has 62 health points out of a total of 78, which shows that the attack was not as effective as he had hoped. With few options left, he decides to use his claws, activating the poisonous and paralyzing claws ability for the first time. After attacking repeatedly, he retreats and checks his own status, realizing that he now has only 42 health points. The Taranturok's condition shows light exhaustion, partial paralysis, and total fury, which is definitely not a good sign. The protagonist does not understand how this is possible, since the spider still has half of its life remaining. He realizes that he has only made the situation worse. Deciding that he needs to get out of there immediately, while the monster is still partially paralyzed, he uses his rolling ability to escape. However, the paralysis quickly fades, and the enraged spider begins chasing him. At that moment, he remembers that he can fly, but his small wings do not allow him to go very far. He becomes confused when he cannot actually fly, which indicates that his level is still low. With no time to think, he uses the rolling ability again to flee. After 10 full minutes of non-stop rolling, the spider is still chasing him, showing no signs of fatigue. The divine voice informs him that the rolling ability has increased from level 2 to level 3. This gives him a bit of hope, and he starts to believe that he can survive, since he is now faster. The divine voice then announces that he has received the title of Running Chicken. The protagonist immediately asks if that means he is being called a coward. He explains that he would face the spider if he had any chance of winning. But that is clearly not the case. The situation worsens when he realizes that he is approaching a cliff and knows that a fall would certainly kill him. He thinks about turning right before the edge, but soon considers that he might be able to escape if he reaches the other side. Even knowing that his flying ability is unreliable, he decides to jump with all the speed he can muster, betting everything on that attempt. At the highest point of the jump, he opens his wings and tries to use the wind in his favor to reach the other side. To his surprise, it works better than expected. He manages to escape, although he is completely exhausted. The protagonist believes he has shaken off the spider, but panics when he realizes that it has created a bridge of webs to continue the pursuit. Forced to flee desperately, he crashes through several monsters along the way, gaining large amounts of experience thanks to his special title, which causes him to quickly rise to level 8. Feeling stronger, he decides to stop running and finally face the spider. After analyzing his abilities and enduring a powerful poison thanks to the resistance he acquired, the protagonist deceives the spider by pretending to be dead and defeats it with a decisive tail attack. The victory takes him straight to level 14. In addition to unlocking new abilities, although the long-awaited human transformation still does not appear, which leaves him frustrated. Exhausted, he finds a cave and decides to use it as a base. There, he prepares an improvised meal with strange fruits that improve the flavor of the meat, which unexpectedly earns him the title of Lord Chef. Despite being satisfied, he reflects bitterly on his monstrous appearance and the fact that he is now seen as an enemy of humanity. Meanwhile, in the village, Miriam becomes worried upon learning that two figures were seen near a lake. Even though she wants to go search for them, she is stopped by Mariel, who decides to ask the guild for help. The next day, the protagonist wakes up recovered, but strange problems arise when he tries to view his own status. After intense pain, his ability evolves once again, although his vision remains blurred, ending the episode with even more mysteries surrounding his new form.